welcome to our small but mighty meetup group for today, November 12th. It's the Houston Nonprofit Tableau User Group. Paula's here. Hi, Paula. And then Erika, are you here with us?
Hello, this is Erika.
Hi. And then I'm sorry, I'm not going to pronounce your name correctly. Daru?
Nice to meet you all. Hi.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining.
Absolutely.
So we are a small but mighty meetup group. So my name is Jessica Davison. I'm the Director of Learning, Analytics, and Compliance with the United Way of Greater Houston. Usually joining me as my co-facilitator, co-lead of this meetup group is Kristen Deppy with Baker Ripley, but she's not here yet. And so I'm a little worried because we were talking yesterday afternoon about this. So I don't know where she's at, but hopefully she's okay. So we kind of start off pretty casual, and we have scheduled a speaker to come in, and so I'm hope she's not here yet either. So it just might be one of those Fridays. So we'll see how it goes. But we do have just want to go around and do welcome and introduction. So I kind of did mine. My name is Jessica. I've been using Tableau now probably for 3 years, I would say. I do a lot of our internal Tableau efforts, and we have a few dashboards on our website, so I kind of lead that, but I'm with United Way of Greater Houston. And so maybe just a quick round of introductions. So your name, where you work, and how long you've been using Tableau, and kind of what you're doing with Tableau. So
I can go ahead. Hi everyone, my name is Paula Valmontin. I work for a nonprofit based in Houston called Urban Harvest. We have farmers markets, community gardens. We have our recently launched mobile market and food access program. And I've been using Tableau for about 1 year, 1 year and a half. And I recently got certified, so I'm super excited. I love it. And it's been super helpful for our organization to kind of like bring data to our directors and be able to make better decisions. So yeah, excited to be here. Thank you, Jessica. I'll pass it on to Dhruv.
Hey y'all, this is my first time in this meeting. My name is Dhruv Katar. I really work in the Salesforce ecosystem since 2015, but I've been using Tableau on and off since 2013. So my relationship with Tableau goes back longer, but again, it's very on and off, and I've been very passionate about the product. Again, I kind of work in consulting, but almost entirely with nonprofit organizations here in Texas and California, kind of across the board, and just really excited to see how other nonprofits here in Houston are using Tableau, and just cool stuff y'all are doing. I pass it off to Erika.
Okay. So my name is Erika Lyles. I'm the research and evaluation lead for Baker Ripley. I actually have been using Tableau for about a year. My background's in public health, so I do have a lot of work with visualization. But I'm still pretty fresh to Tableau, but I've been grinding pretty hard for the past year and a half to make sure I get as much as possible. So glad to be here.
Great, thank you. And that goes to Kristen. So glad to see you.
Sorry, my calendar screwed up and it had this an hour later. I'm Kristen Deppy with Baker Ripley. I'm the Assistant Director of Research and Evaluation. Was there a question that I'm supposed to say?
Oh, and just what you do with Tableau.
So I do anything that's asked really of the agency reporting wise, and then for program evaluations as well, and to help with operations.
Yeah, that maybe. So I don't see Sarah joining yet. Do we think Sarah's probably, do you think she has it an hour back too? Or do you think she's just coming in a little later?
I don't know. She said she would be here, so.
It's okay. We can do door prizes right now. There's 3. So we have 3 door prizes and 3 guests. So that's great. So I can tell you the door prizes, and if I have the wheel, I can spin it and you can see what your luck carries for today. Or if somebody's like, oh, I really want that, if you want to claim it, I'm all about that too. So we have 2 $50 gift cards to Tableau store. And then we have 1 of the e-learning certificates. And e-learning gets you into like the Tableau paid learning station.
I won the $50 Tableau store, which I never heard about the Tableau store, so I'm Googling it right now.
Okay.
Erika, you can have the second pick. I'll take what's left.
I'll let you decide. I hand it over to you, Drew.
Oh, I think I'm kind of keen on the wheel. I'm so sorry,
Okay,
Jessica.
okay, let's do
I
the
love
wheel.
the
Let's
wheel.
see
It's so
what
funny.
luck is.
I've
Okay.
done it once, and it's
Okay. So I'm gonna take Paula's name out since she got hers. Okay, let me share screen so y'all can see the wheel.
yeah.
Okay, sharing. Okay, so you see the wheel? Oh, yes, you do. Okay, good. Let me make that a little bigger. Oh, full screen. There we go. There we go. Okay, so this will be for the e-learning gift card, like the e-learning thing.
I guess I'm learning.
You're
Awesome.
learning. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know this was on the docket, so I'll say that just made it worth it.
Yeah. Hopefully that confetti was worth it. Yeah, that was good stuff. Okay, and so that gives the $50 Tableau store gift card to Erika. So yay. We like having prizes here. That's always the fun thing. It's a Friday, we need prizes.
Best thing that happened all week.
Okay, so I'll get those to y'all after this is done. I don't want to multitask too much and like send something I'm not supposed to send. I don't even have a pen. I'll remember it though. So yeah, Kristen's doing her thing, trying to find out about Sarah. And so it's interesting that just to kind of curious about like how different nonprofits are using Tableau. And so I know some is like extra, like I know I do a lot of external facing dashboards. I'm probably starting to do more internal. But Paula, y'all use it both ways, right? Like you have internal and external. And I'm wondering how, and Drew, would love your thoughts too. Like, what have you seen as like your challenges for using it internally? And is that similar for external challenges? And maybe my thinking too is like the accessibility of it, you know, like, cause sometimes I feel like I need to like coach people. I'm like, if you click this and click that, not everybody's open to exploring it or nobody has time to explore it as well.
Yeah, I will say the biggest challenge has been that I started using Tableau at the right time that we started I started learning about Tableau at the same time that we were using Tableau. So my first dashboards were like not very user friendly. So that was the biggest challenge, like internally and externally. But we did have a clear vision of where we wanted to go. Like we wanted to engage our donors in a different way. We wanted to build trust with our funders and like our staff, and also kind of like improve communication between programs. So yeah, I mean, that was the biggest challenge. And then just kind of like engaging people to go visit our website. And so combined with Tableau, we built a website built in wix.com, which is like literally like a PowerPoint, and you build a website. So I kind of like create windows with each of the dashboards in this website. And we've been promoting that website, which is urbanharvestmetrics.org. And that's where whenever we have like an important annual survey, we publish the results and we share them with our community gardens. We share them with our farmers market vendors, and we just let them know that it's not just complete the survey and we forget about it. We are using it. So that also builds our trust with them. So yeah, it's been really, really fun. Sometimes I feel like, oh my God, I should be writing grants. I should be applying for grants, but I know this is an investment and I know it's paying off. And I mean, it's my time plus $58 a year. So far, yeah.
It's a great learning opportunity. Yeah. And Jessica just shut me up because I have so many opinions on that question you just asked. But I mean, I guess when I started using Tableau, it was very internal facing. It was actually in the for-profit context, and this goes back a while to 2013. And really the idea was taking large amounts of data and data crunching, right? So really just coming up with analysis of the data, which is very internal centric. And it's, easy enough to like, crunch the data, do the slicing that we want to see, pull out the trends that we want to see, and export it, and then put it on like a spreadsheet or something for other people to consume, so they don't have to interact with the solution. But when we talk about external facing, I guess I'm talking about really just, I think, Paul, as you mentioned, like putting the visuals on the website. Now, I mentioned I come from kind of the Salesforce ecosystem, so that in itself, I just did like a big project last year in terms of trying to do an external facing, crunching data from Salesforce, putting it on externally facing visibility. And again, nonprofit could not afford the site license, the Salesforce, the server license. I forget, now I'm forgetting what the term is called, to have a server instance running and expose data publicly, unless y'all know some hacks, because I know there's some out there. But so I was doing a Tableau public thing, right? And really we had to like pull the data into a Google Sheet and then display it. And this is again large amounts of data. So that was one challenge in terms of getting the data and the insights publicly visible through public, which is an amazing thing. Oh my God, I love Tableau public, but just so limited when it comes to functionality. And the second challenge, of course, is they wanted a lot of mapping, really, of the Houston area, school districts, yada, yada, yada. And the application is not intuitive for the end user, in terms of, oh, you have to click this button and then you can like scroll around the map and whatnot. So, and at least in my extensive like digging around, I didn't find any way to change those defaults. So I think that was a bit challenging, but I don't think Tableau was designed to be a consumer, I guess, facing tool really. And I'm hoping that they're going to get there to the point that an end user with no technical experience can play around with it. So I mean, there are like, I guess, barriers in that sense, but the tool and the platform is just so powerful that I'm still like a big advocate and, passionate about it nonetheless.
I can write that down because I need to like sit on that for a little while, because that's a really strong point right there of who is Tableau, who are you designing your Tableau for? And like if community member on your website, like you have to know what you're doing most of the time. Like there's a few things here or there that are pretty intuitive. You can always put instructions and like annotate and like help guide them, right? Like there's cool ways to do that. But, a lot of it is like you kind of need to spend that time exploring it, right? To know all the drilling and that kind of thing.
And then I would add there, Jessica, because after 1.5 years like using Tableau here, I feel like I started building dashboards kind of like program by program, but all that time invested, now like we need to kind of like, I need to justify all that time to our board members and our executive director. And I feel like if I started maybe there, just like building something for them so they could see the power of the tool and like how it could help us, I would have started with our development team, building fundraising reports, fundraising analysis, metrics, so they see, oh my God, because at the end of the day, it's like funding. They want to see the value of it. And I would have started maybe differently, but our food access program is the most advanced in terms of data. So we had the data right there, ready to go. So, but
and I think, Paul, I think you have the argument right there. The data is right there, ready to go. So that's a good reason why to start there. And when it comes to like board members, I feel like, they have oh God, I hope no one here is a board member because it's going to sound so judgmental, but they're like kind of sort of entitled a little bit, but also they're not like sophisticated unless you have a very like technical or like, keyed in board member analytical, but they're not that sophisticated. So you show them some pretty charts of like, hey, look at all this like beautiful visuals we've been doing, and they'll be like, ooh, pretty. And then you say, and the next thing we're doing is our development analysis and whatnot. So I think that kind of sort of gives them the beauty of the visuals, because again, who likes to see spreadsheets or tables of data, and now next you're going to get what you what you want, or I guess what's of interest to you. And hey, by the way, throw some more money at for this, and they might just bite, I think really it's kind of playing more with their psychology and how they think and how they function. And that's pretty outstanding though.
Yeah, that's always a good point. Yeah, and I would say that they don't have a lot of time. So they have a short time amount of window to like look into stuff, dig into stuff. So oftentimes you have to like really give them that key high level what they're looking at. But that always comes with questions. And so being able to have that dashboard built to where you can like easily toggle and filter for those questions that are often coming up is so good. And yeah, I agree with like a development dashboard. Like that could really help just to be easy, like an easy way to like pull out for reporting for different grants and different funders. Like that's so, that's one. There's always different kinds.
I
but
don't know how, I was gonna ask Kristen about this because I'm very curious to, I don't know if we could see them, but maybe we can have like a separate call for this, but like I would love to see how Baker Ripley is using Tableau for like for your development team, or like what type of metrics, or I mean, you've been there longer than we've been in this journey, so I would love to see your dashboards.
I was about to tell you that I'm going to take your comments to heart, because my next step is to get buy-in from the agency to invest more in Tableau, because we're trying to put like our program quarterly reports in Tableau right now. So like that's the big push for 2022, is to turn these really dirty, ugly like Word document quarterly reports into dashboards in Tableau. So then it's like, well, now we need more licenses and things like that, because right now we kind of cheat the system. But we can't do that with the quarterly report, if it's going out to everybody. And then to Drew's point, like we're having to create these dashboards for the quarterly reports that we can print for the board members, because they want the printed copy in front of them rather than, so it's having to get buy-in on that side too.
Yeah, that is like my biggest struggle. I'm like, why do you want this? I get it why they want it as a printout, but I'm like, my like little soul dies every time I hear that we need this in like a printout. I'm like, oh fuck, I need it.
Yeah.
Everybody has a phone or a tablet now. Just like look at it there.
Yeah. I'll say one more thing, and welcome, Sarah. When we first started talking about putting everything in Tableau, they wanted me to recreate the really ugly table that's really hard to figure anything out into the dashboard. And my heart just died. I was like, no, that's the opposite of what we want to do.
Yeah, just put some gradient coloring or something to it, and it'll be a little bit redeeming that, okay, at least Tableau's doing something over here.
I actually, Kristen, I hadn't told you the story before, but at my last job, I worked with healthcare data. And one time I was working for a program that did blood pressure data. And so I had this like great chart that showed the systolic and the diastolic and how they ranged per patient, and how over the year they were in the program, how each one went up and down. It was a beautiful timeline. And then they asked if I could take that data and put it into a pie chart.
Ooh.
I was like, how do you put blood pressure data into a pie chart? And I was like, okay. And I sat on that for about a week, and I was like, I need to change jobs. And now I work for Baker Ripley. So I'm much happier.
I need that in a pie chart. Kristen, that would be like a joke, like a April Fool's Day from Kristen would be like, I need that in a pie chart.
Also,
well,
like
for blood pressure,
wouldn't
you just do 2 pie charts? Diastolic over systolic?
That's what I had to do. I just made her 2 pie charts, but I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And I showed it to her, and she was like, oh, that's perfect. I'm like, what are you getting out of this? Like, what do you feel about it? What are you getting from this data? So I actually, I messaged all of my friends who were in my MPH program, and I was like, please, can someone help me figure out how do I put blood pressure data in a pie chart? And they were like, you don't. I was like, I know, but please. These people pay me. I have to do something. So
it reminds me of how comfortable people are with different visuals, and like to Kristen's like that chart they wanted you to recreate. I'm like, something must be comfortable about that. They get something out of like seeing it that way. So I think it's like, how can we
pie charts and donut charts are like just the most popular, I guess. It's like limited information, and their brains can process it, but if they're asking for something that you put in a timeline in a pie chart, well, I mean, all the best, trying to make any value out of that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the conversation as we waited for Sarah. And this is, I think, a perfect segue And I'll get to that in a second. But Sarah, I apologize for the timing problem. We had an email issue earlier this year, and it is apparently still screwing up my calendar. But I would like to welcome everybody. Sarah Battersby, who's with Tableau with a primary area of focus is cartography with an emphasis on cognition. And with cognition, that's why we know pie graphs are so terrible. And that was my segue. She's been in Tableau since 2015. She was an associate professor of geography at the University of South Carolina before that. And her work emphasizes on how to help everyone visualize and use spatial information more effectively without needing an advanced degree. So with that, I will let you take over, Sarah.
Thanks. So with the updated time, just let me know when I have to like stop, because I'm just gonna like kind of start going crazy with like demos and stuff. So just like wave your hands if I like start like rambling too long. But I've already figured out this is like going to be the most fun tug of all time, because like, I don't know, I like your guys' conversation. And when you want to have a special tug just on pie charts, I can recommend this guy, Robert Kosara from the research team at Tableau, who has probably done more research on pie charts than anyone else in the world. It's like we all just give him grief about pie charts all the time. Anyway, so I've got a bunch of demos that I was going to go through today to highlight some of the creative ways that you can use Tableau for mapping and spatial analysis. And I heard that many, if not all of you, are at least a bit familiar with mapping in Tableau. So I'm going to mostly skip discussion of like the super basics on how to make maps. But since I'm going to make a bunch of maps, you'll probably see a lot of the here's how maps get made. And along the way, just let me know if you want me to stop and explain what's going on or clarify anything. And really just feel free to unmute and ask questions. There aren't a ton of folks, and I probably won't be looking at the chat so much because I'm going to share my screen in just a minute. So let me just get workbook number 1 up and ready to go, and I'll find the share screen button. That's the right one. Okay, cool. So hopefully you should see a screen with a Tableau workbook with some 311 service requests. So I'm going to start out with something that I think of as like a tour of map types. So I'll make a bunch of different map types, and they're probably not going to be like unfamiliar map types to you, but I really like this workbook because I think it's a good way to think about the basic question of how is my data distributed? And I think it kind of gets at one of the questions that you guys were talking about before, where it's like, what is the right visualization to use for data sets? And one of the common pitfalls that I see with spatial analysis is that I made a map, it's the answer. Without considering like what the actual question was or how different maps can help uncover different types of patterns. So I'm going to use this data set from 311 service requests from Boston to talk about different map types and how the way that you make the map might actually show you different patterns in the data. So this data set, if you're not familiar with 311 calls or 311 programs, this is like one of those community members reports locations of interest. There's graffiti here that needs to be cleaned up, or a pothole, or trash that hasn't been picked up. It's like kind of service request type of things for a city. So we've got a big data set, which is nice. So there's good stuff to play with in here. We've got about 222,000 different records. So we're going to start with this question of, what if we just wanted to know something about how this data is distributed? And so I'm going to use 311 service requests as my example here, but this could be any point data. It could be donor locations, it could be patient locations, it could be trees that you mapped around your city, whatever. It's all just point data. So when you think about just the basics of how is stuff distributed, the first thing you want to do is just throw it on the map. And I'm going to throw it on the map using a geometry that I created, even though this data set has latitude and longitude in it. So I'll just drop the geometry on. And what that does, it's just going to draw all of the points by default for me. And I want to open up and show you something special about this. So there are a couple of reasons why I like using the make point calculation in Tableau to make geometries. First of all, it means there's only one pill I have to deal with. And I will admit that I consciously think every time, okay, is latitude my columns or is longitude my columns? And I've been working with spatial data for a while, and like I actually have to be like, okay, X, Y, and if I make a geometry out of it using make point, I just drop the geometry on and Tableau does all the magic for me. But the thing that's cool about this is sometimes if you get data like from a city or from an open data portal, it doesn't come in as latitude and longitude. It comes in as like X and Y coordinates in some random map projection. There's this like kind of hidden feature in make point. So it can take in latitude and longitude, or it can take in 3 different numbers. And this is your X coordinate, your Y coordinate, and a number that represents the spatial reference ID. So if you download data from an open portal, it'll often say, this is the projection or this is the coordinate system for that data. All you have to do is put that magic number in this 3rd item, and Tableau will just magically convert it into the right geographic location for you. I feel like this is the feature that we have not talked about nearly enough because I use it all the time, especially with stuff like I get data from the police department and it's like, here are all of the locations for this. And we used the UTM zone 10 north coordinate system. I'm like, cool, it's not latitude and longitude, but you can use that extra number just to solve it. So now, I've got my point locations. I can see them on the map. I can drop, an ID on here and get some details about any of the individual points. It's nice. I can see the distribution, but there are 200,000 data points here. So it's only answering part of the question. And the main thing I see is that requests come in from everywhere around the city. And I could start drilling in, and I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in on some random locations here. And we can look at some of the detail in the base map to try and get context. So we've got a bunch of detail that are built in on the base maps. And one of the first things I generally do with any map is I figure out, like what is the level of detail that I want to work with, and then what is the right base map for it. So we do have a ton of extra base maps. A couple of versions ago, when we switched over to really just using Mapbox as our base map service, we introduced some really nice new ones like streets. So if you're working with address level data and you want to be able to see a lot of extra detail, the streets data set by default has a lot of points of interest built in, building footprints in case that's useful, including building numbers on a lot of them, street addresses, location names. So here's the Massachusetts eye and ear Longwood, so it has all of these kind of point of interest details that are just automatically built in on the base map. And if you don't like them, you can always turn them off. So under map layers, there is a list of, here are all of the layers that are going into that. So if you want the points of interest to go away, you just uncheck it and they'll just disappear from the base map. So that's the first thing, just kind of looking at how is my data distributed. But when you've got a big data set like this, the general point you can get from it is there's data all over the place. So you're probably going to want to start aggregating it. And aggregating it is where you get all of these different views of the data. So you often want to look at more than one of them. And it's going to depend on what the specific question is that you have. So let's say I wanted to know about this data by something like zip code. Tableau can do this automatic geocoding. You don't have to have zip code data set. You can just say, hey, I've got this field. It's a zip code. The geographic role is zip code. Tableau, do some magic for me. I can drop that on the view. It's going to give me those zip code polygons that come, installed with Tableau. And it's going to say, I know which records are attached to each one of these zip codes. So then I can just drop my count attribute on there and hey, it's going to count stuff up for me. But here's the first gotcha. Notice the legend goes to like 379,000 and there's no color that's that dark on my map. So if you just kind of take this at face value, you kind of get a map that doesn't really represent the actual distribution until you find the little unknown wart down in the corner. And if I click on that,
I think she froze for me. Is it just me?
Yeah,
it's still counting that up in the legend. What was that?
You froze for a second.
So I was just talking about, you can find those null values, because any zip code that had a null got counted up and put into the legend, but it isn't really being reflected in the map. So what we want to do is make sure that those get filtered out. Now the legend actually matches up. So I've got like 150,000 calls in this one. One thing was like squished down into one end of the legend. So you always want to look for that, look for these anomalies where the colors just don't look right, or where you get that little warning down in the corner that maybe something isn't mapping quite right. So here's one way of looking at our distribution now, and we may have a zip code related question where I really care about what is inside this particular zip code location. Or maybe we've got some other data that we care about, like neighborhood names. So neighborhood isn't something.
Sarah, you're freezing and the map is frozen on my
Computer's
screen.
moving real slow. Okay, let me try and I'm going to try and unshare and come back. Stop sharing. And I can't unshare, and everything is frozen on my computer. Can anybody still hear me? Do I at least
hear you?
exist?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so
I'm
let me
wondering if it helps
unshare.
to turn off our videos to just optimize bandwidth for Sarah.
Yeah, it may help.
It's not
And
ideal,
I'm gonna
but
see if I can turn. I'm going to turn my video off too. Oh, it's not actually letting me my meeting controls aren't responding in Zoom. So,
can one of the hosts maybe?
yeah, if somebody steals sharing from me.
I took it and then
That's really weird. It's frozen on Sarah's screen, even though it's prompting me. But Jessica, I believe you started sharing your screen.
yeah, and I'm sharing. I can see the screen on my screen.
I've never seen this before, but there is like an option to like choose between two different screen shares.
And I've never done that before either. Sarah, could you leave and come back? Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. So I showed like some zip code level mapping using this geocoding built in Tableau, but sometimes your question is tied to like a more granular level of detail. And this data set happened to have neighborhood name. So I can do something like just drop my count on and see how many things fall in each neighborhood. And here, you can see that there's a bunch of nulls in here. But if I want to map it, this is where bringing in external spatial files from Tableau comes in really handy. So I can drop this geometry of neighborhood boundaries in, and then just go ahead and count things up. And now I know, once I have the neighborhood name, now I know for which neighborhood have the most calls come in. And it's actually a different pattern than we saw with the zip code data, where now we're seeing, most of the calls are coming from this neighborhood more, over on the east side. And the way that I mapped this out, I just brought in an external spatial file. So my 311 service requests is on one side of my relationship. And then I grabbed a neighborhood data set from an open data portal. And I just formed a relationship between a neighborhood name that was in here. So there's no spatial join or anything in here. It's just a relationship between a spatial file and an attribute file on an attribute called name. But this gives us a very different pattern. So if I only look at zip code, I see a hotter spot or a higher set of values over on the west side. And if I look at neighborhood name, I see the highest values over on the eastern portion of the city. So there's something going on in this data set where the way the attributes are recorded and the records that don't have values or records that may be mislabeled give us a totally different sense of what that pattern is in the data. Or I may want to do something like look at census tracts, for instance. So this is something that would be completely outside of the data set. If I wanted to combine my attribute with, say, median household income or some kind of socio-demographic information that the census tracks, I can bring that data in. And one way you can do it is you can download a shape file and join that in directly, or you can use an ArcGIS REST service. So if your city or local local agencies or even the folks that you work for, if you serve data out in an ArcGIS portal, you can actually connect to that open data portal directly and just bring the data in. So if I want to look at census tracts, let's just grab my shape and drop it on the map. So here are all of the census tracts. And if I want to count up which points fall inside each census tract, let me put the GeoID on here so the tracts know which one they are. I can drop my count on and whoa, I get a totally different pattern because this is joining the data in a different way. So I'm going to go back and just look at the where is all of the data. What do we see here? We see a lot of points on top of each other. There's no way you could tell me like which part of the city has the most 311 requests from this. And now if I look at this map, there's something really weird happening where I have 52,000 requests in this one location. And the map pretty much shows like nothing happening anywhere else in the city. So if this were the map that I made initially, I'd be like, what's going on with this pattern? And I can show you why this is different than the other maps that we've made so far. Hopefully I'll go back to the data source. What this is doing is a spatial join instead of an attribute join. So inside my Boston 311 requests, I actually did an intersection between the geometry of the census tracts and the point location for each of the 311 calls. And so that tells me that when I'm looking at the data set from an attribute level, oh, this is what it says the zip code is. This is what it says the neighborhood is, versus this is what it says the actual geographic location is. I see a problem that comes up. And so this is telling me that all of my data points are now up in this one location, or at least the majority of them. So we'd have to drill in to try and figure out what's going on. And I actually spent a bunch of time with this data set, and I'll show you what I found. And I created a little filter for it. There are a lot of data points that fall in one specific location. So when I get rid of those, I actually see the true distribution of the data. But because I mapped it with a spatial join, I was able to pull out, here's this location that seems to have some kind of weird anomaly happening. And I'll show you a couple other map types that'll highlight this and show you how I found it. But this is the sort of problem that you want to look for in your data to figure out, are there weird things happening with the spatial data that you've been provided? Because sometimes there are errors in the data and it's hard to pull out unless you look at a number of different data sets. So another map type that you can use, which is actually great for trying to find this kind of weird anomaly, is the heat map or the density mark type in Tableau. So I've got all of my point locations, and I'm just going to switch to this thing called density mark type. And what it's going to do is it's going to give me this relative more or less view of the map. And so things where you've got a lot of data points stacked right on top of each other are going to show up as a bit of a hotspot as soon as it loads. Yeah, so what just happened to all of my data points? Like I had all of these points all over the city, and now I have one bright blob. What this is telling me is that relatively, there are so many more points right in this one location that they just wash out all of the data points everywhere else. There are just so many right here that nothing else has this kind of density. And so I could keep zooming in and look at the base map and try and figure out what's going on. And it turns out that there are like 50,000 data points stacked right on top of each other. And it's kind of just right across the street from City Hall. I turned the labels off on the base map, so you can't see it, but one of these building footprints is the City Hall. And I think this is, if we didn't know what location something was coming from, we just gave it a default latitude and longitude. And by giving it that default latitude and longitude, it throws off any analytics that you want to do when it involves looking at the raw location and not like the zip code attribute or the neighborhood name attribute. The latitude and longitude is like, hey, here I am. I'm a huge hotspot, but this is probably 50,000 data points that probably really belong somewhere else. And so I figured out what the latitude and longitude was of all those points stacked up. And I wrote a little calculation to just get rid of them, because it turned out that all of them had exactly the same latitude and longitude value. So I just said, if this is your location, you're an anomaly. And so I want to be able to turn that data point off as, on the fly. So now if I get rid of those data points, and I'll just use that filter that I created on the attribute, as soon as I turn them off, I can get a true look of the distribution of the data across the city. And so these are some of the ways that I go about debugging problems in maps and looking at different distributions just to try and get a sense of what is in my data. And again, I'll apologize that my computer seems to be running kind of slowly today. But this would be the true distribution of those points, not constraining them to zip code boundaries or census tract boundaries or any other polygon. This is really more of how they change smoothly and continuously across space. Another way you can do that with a spatial join, if you want something that's a little bit more absolute than a heat map, is to use something like Hex BiMs. And so here I've created a shape file, and I created this in this program called QGIS or QGIS. It's a free open source geographic information system. And I can bring that into Tableau just like I brought the census tracts in. So just bring it in as a shape file. And then I can count up my service requests inside each of those hexagons. And I'll get rid of all of my anomalies. And I can see an absolute count of how many points fall in each of these locations. And the reason this is nice is because now if I wanted to run an action and say, tell me something about all of the points right here, I could click on that specific hexagon and have that drive an attribute table of some sort, show me the pie chart of the types of calls that came in for this particular location. And just to see what the difference is between these, I went ahead and dropped them all on different layers in a single map, because this is a cool map feature that came out in 2020.4. We introduced layering, so it's really easy to just create all of these different layers. You can turn them on and off from the marks cards. So if I want to see my zip codes and my hex bins together to see how those distributions compare to one another, I can have them layered on top of each other and see the data together. I could put the raw point values on top of that. It lets me look at how all of these distributions match up. There's also something that came out earlier this year, which is a control map layers widget. So if you then put this data set up on Tableau Public or on your website, you can give the user control of those layers. So if you want to be able to turn things on and off, you don't have to be in edit mode, or you don't have to have Tableau desktop to be able to do that. And I really like these layers because it lets you put the context of the map in the hands of the person who's using it or making the decision without having to tell them, download the workbook, open it up in Tableau, do some work with it. You can just say, open up the layer control, turn on the layers that you need for your analytics, and customize it so that you can answer the questions that you need. Other things you can do in here, you can actually lock or disable interaction with specific layers. So if you want to be able to do selections, maybe I want to make this so that the only layer that I can interact with or do selections on is the hex BiMs. I can lock everything else down. And now if I do a selection, the only things that will be selected are the actual hexagon polygons. It's not going to select from the heat map. It's not going to select from the zip codes. It's not going to select the raw point locations. It would just select those hexagons.
So here's
So you can, yeah.
I guess I'm like for the layers. So it's layering all the same 311 data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and this would be different than like doing a dual axis if you had like another, you couldn't do this with 2 different or 3 different data sets. That you would need like the dual axis.
Yeah, with the dual axis, you can really only see essentially 2 layers at once. And you
Okay.
don't have a lot of individual control over the layers. So if you do a dual axis, you can't say only select from one axis and not the other, for instance. This layering allows you to build up as many layers as you need from your data set. And I use it for examples like this, where I want to do comparisons across different distributions, but it's also really nice graphically. Let's say you wanted to have outlines on one layer and filled polygons on another layer and the point locations on a third layer. You can stack everything up kind of so cartographically you get a little bit more control over what the final map provides and which layers people can interact with or not. So let's say you've got, a road network that you wanted to show up and you wanted it a different level of detail than we have in the base map. You could bring in your lines for the road network and just lock them down and say, don't make them interactive because they're just going to sit there on the bottom layer so people can see them, but not click on them.
Okay.
Yeah, layering just gets a little closer to like that GIS type functionality where you can bring in more than 2 things.
Yeah, because I think that's often like the question I get asked. Like, we want to know, we do 211 calls. And so 211 calls, the number of clients being served in that area, how many locations are near that in that area, and some other, what's the demographic breakdown in that area. And so there's like all these things they want to know on zip code level. So the layering sounds like that would be something.
Yeah, you could have here are the 211 call locations, here are the zip codes as another layer for the location. If you had maybe like service facilities and you want to know how many of the 211 calls are within a specific distance of that, you could have another layer that had the buffer drawn on top around each of those service locations. And then you could color code the points based on whether or not they're inside those buffers. And I've got something that's a little bit close to that as an example, which I'll show. Maybe I'll just kind of jump to it right now because why not? There's nothing that says that I have to go through things in a specific order. This actually isn't exactly a point-to-point distance example. I didn't bring that demo up, but it will show you something with point locations. So these are all farmers markets in the Philadelphia area. So think of these as like your service locations or something. And I'm going to look at the relationship of those points to the census tracts that are nearby. So I've got all of the census tracts from the Philadelphia area as well. And my goal in the analytics is I want to put all of those farmers markets on top of all of those census tracts and start to ask some questions about them. So which census tract does each farmers market fall in? What are the characteristics of those census tracts, for instance? So I'll just jump straight to kind of the end story type of thing, where we're going to see the census tracts. We're going to see some color coding based on which farmers markets are, inside them and how close they are. And then we're going to look at what % of households in the nearby area receive SNAP benefits. And so this is put together where I've got my census tracts underneath. I've got my point locations for my farmers markets. I've got a buffer drawn on top. And then I've got color coding on my census tracts that says, are you inside that, distance around each of my farmers markets? Now, for any of those, tell me something about it. So here's this particular location, 62% of the population within 0.7 miles, or of the census tracts that are within 0.7 miles receive SNAP benefits. There are 7,852 households receiving SNAP and 12,595 total. And then you can make this dynamic in Tableau. So I'm going to go ahead and just increase the buffer size. And you can see that little circle is starting to grow. And the census tracts that get highlighted are changing as I increase the search area around this. Now, if you had point locations for the 211 calls, for instance, you could do a calculation with that where maybe you're showing each of the individual point locations on this map and then looking at the distance between this farmer's market and each of those 211 calls and saying, are you inside this buffer or are you outside this buffer? And I have an example of that on Tableau Public, and I can send a link over if you guys want to take a look at that. But it really just looks at these point-to-point distance relationships. So I can show you how this was put together because it would be a similar process to put it together with point locations or with these polygon locations. Because what I'm doing is I have my census tracts and my farmers markets. And this is a little complicated because I joined in 2 different copies of the census tracts just for identification purposes. But the main meat of the join is right here. So I have 2 calculations. One is where are the farmers markets and drawing a buffer around those, because what I want to do is I want to do a search for things that are inside a distance around the farmers markets. Now, one of the catches with spatial joins in Tableau is that you can't use a parameter in the join calculation. So what I do is I hard code the distance of the largest area that I might want to look for. So I'm saying, I don't want to look for anything that's beyond 2 miles from a farmer's market because, I walk a lot and I'm probably not going to walk more than 40 minutes to get to the farmer's market. So we'll just consider 2 miles to be a good distance here as our maximum. And then I'm going to do an intersection with my census tracts. And in this case, the intersection is based on the centroid of the census tract. So the centroid of the tract has to be within 2 miles of my farmer's market for that tract to be considered inside my area of interest. And we can actually change how we do this calculation in the 2021.3 release of Tableau. Because we can do polygon to polygon intersections. So that makes it a little bit more accurate. But this is just saying anytime that centroid is within distance. Now, if you were doing this with 211 calls, what you would do is instead of using the centroid of a census tract, this side of the join would be the latitude and longitude of any one of your 211 calls. So then each 211 call knows whether or not it's within 2 miles of your service facilities or your warehouses or whatever point location you want to measure out from. So now the table that gets created from this, every one of these census tracts knows if it's within 2 miles of any farmer's market. And if it is, then it kind of gets subsetted out. So here, if I look at this location, this gray set, which I left in just for kind of coloring context, all of those know that the centroid of those tracts is within 2 miles of my farmer's market. But I'm color coding separately to say each of these orange tracts are actually within this parameterized distance, which allows me to then make it interactive. And I'll show you the calculation that drives that. We'll just jump to the worksheet really quickly, because what I'm doing is I'm using the spatial intersection on the data source to say, tell me, narrow down the set of things that are nearby. Narrow down the table so that each farmer's market knows what's within 2 miles. But now I want to find my distance. Now I'll see if I can figure out what I named that field. Oh, tract is nearby. Edit. So now I just use a distance calculation and say, if the centroid of my tract, or if the distance between the centroid of my tract to my farmer's market in miles is less than this buffer distance that I've set in a parameter, then it's inside. And so I can use that as a true false now to encode each of my census tracts. So if I just look at the true values, It's just going to be what shows up as orange on the map. Each one of those census tracts is within my parameter distance of each of those farmers markets. So you can do these really interesting spatial analytics and look for the relationships over distance, just using a combination of a spatial intersection and a distance calculation. And I'll show you what you can do with 2021.3, because we added in polygon to polygon intersections. So now you can get a more absolute measure. So what this is saying is, for this buffer polygon, tell me every census tract that it intersects at all. And so I know for this particular farmer's market, within 1 mile, 51.8% of the residents use SNAP benefits. For this particular farmer's market, 44%. 40.2%. And then I can pull out for each of the individual tracts inside that area the details on what is the percent household in poverty, what percent of households receive SNAP, what is the median household income. So I can look at the variation within these areas. So for instance, we have one census tract here that has a median household income of $70,000 and one census tract that has a median household income of $16,000. So we could actually pull out a lot of the differences, individually inside these potential areas of interest. And that's all just with a spatial intersection as well. So I'll go to the worksheet so you can see the map specifically. And we can look at the data source just to see what the join looks like. And here's, it's just another spatial intersection. So I have, I'll show you the individual calculations. Here are all of my farmers markets on this side, and I'm saying, draw me a polygon, a circle of 1 mile around each one of these farmers markets, and intersect that with, it's not joint calculation, intersect that with the geometry of each of the census tracts. So if that polygon touches any of these census tract polygons, I know that they're nearby to each other. It's within 1 mile of my farmer's market. So I can do that polygon to polygon and not have to use that little kind of hacky where the centroid of the polygon has to be within distance. And then I can put that together into a little workbook so I can dynamically explore any of these locations, sort them based on the percent of SNAP residents that are within the distance, and then have some interactivity to be able to highlight and zoom and dig in to get more detail just about that area. So that's kind of a fun thing that you can do with spatial analytics in Tableau. I also wanted to show a few just kind of other creative ways that you can use mapping, because I think these are map styles that are really useful, but aren't as common as I think they should be, because they're not something that you can just do by default and say, hey, Tableau, make me this bivariate choropleth map. Because most people are like, a bivariate what? So I wanted to show you these some interesting different map types, just in case these were useful for the types of analytics that you want to do. And my inspiration for this particular workbook is that I was looking through the USDA website and looking at food deserts and looking at questions of how access to food is measured. And it's an interesting calculation. If you're not familiar with it, it involves two main metrics. One is that you have to both be in a low income census tract, but you also have to have low access to be considered essentially a food desert. And so I wanted to put together some ways to explore that a bit in Tableau. And I'm using layers so that I can walk through looking at how this data set, how the different attributes that go into building up the calculation for a food desert, how they relate to each other. So this is some South Carolina data where we can look at the census tract level at access and at income, and then combine them together so that we've got a richer look at how these attributes relate to each other. So I'm going to use the layer controls because it lets me walk through a little bit of a story with this. The first attribute we would want to look at is low access. And you can actually define low access in a lot of different ways. So I created a parameter so we can explore how different definitions of access might impact whether or not you're a food desert. And so I've got that parameter, I've got my mouse on it over on the right-hand side right now, because these are all of the ways that USDA defines low access. And we can see that choosing different access metrics will make a pretty significant change in which census tracts would even qualify to be considered low access. And so that, if you don't have low access, you can never be a food desert as far as this definition is defined. So access is one characteristic that we have to look at, but then you also have to be low income. So I've got a layer where I've mapped out where are all of the census tracts that meet the requirement to be considered low income. So if I'm thinking about food deserts, you have to be in one of these locations. Now, what if I want to see those two things together? One way I can do it is just giving this binary where if you are both low income and low access, you are a food desert. So here I'm just saying if low income equals true, if low access equals true, the whole polygon is true. You're now low access. And again, we can go back to the parameter and change, what is this access definition? And we can see how that changes what areas might be considered food deserts, for instance. But I feel like this only tells part of the story. And oftentimes with spatial analytics, you want to be able to do these comparisons across multiple different attributes to say, what's happening with the count of clients that I have in this particular location, and how does that relate to the income in that area, or how does that relate to another type of service, or the number of primary care partners that are available that accept Medicare or Medicaid, or some particular health plan. If you want to be able to look at those relationships, there's often more to it than just the binary of you have X characteristic and Y characteristic, therefore, boom, you're a food desert. So that's where something like a bivariate map comes in handy. And so what this map is going to show you is different ways of looking at the data. So here I've got all of the things that are, here are all of the census tracts that are absolutely low access and low income. Actually, it should have just highlighted the one. I'm going to show it to you on a different map where I have the color scheme in a legend. If I just want to look at all of the places that are low access and low income, I can do that. I can highlight those on the map and say, according to the USDA definition, these are places that are low access and low income. But if I were thinking about interventions for people that might be food insecure, just knowing you're in a food desert doesn't mean that these are the only people that might have food security issues. I might really be concerned about people that are low income, even though technically they have access based on the USDA metric. And so this map is going to highlight those folks as well. They're showing up in this blue shade. If I want to look at the people that have access issues, but aren't necessarily on that threshold of low income, I can highlight those and they show up in another shade. Or I can look at the map all together and say, these gray areas, I don't really care so much about these gray areas for an intervention, because I know that they are both not low access and they're not low income at all. And even for this particular census tract, if you look at the tooltip, I went ahead and did a calculation for every single one of those access metrics. And I know that any way you define access, there's no one that would fall in the low access, or there's not no one that would fall in the low access, but the census tract itself doesn't fall in the low access category in any of these. But I could look at some other census tracts and say, okay, this tract here is considered low income. And if I look at some of the access metrics, it would be considered a food desert. Because there are certain characteristics that make it so that people would have low access if you consider that you're more than 20 miles away from a grocery store. And so using a bivariate choropleth map, we can actually pull out more of the relationship between two different attributes. And you can set up these interactive legends so you could highlight aspects that might be particularly interesting to explore. And I'll show you just a few other examples of this, because I think that bivariate choropleth maps can be used for a lot of different things. This is another food insecurity map, and it's looking at food insecurity compared to obesity at the county level in the United States. So you could highlight the places where you have high obesity rates and high food insecurity rates. You could look at the places where you've got high food insecurity rates and low obesity, etc. Yeah, so it's really easy to pull out these patterns across multiple attributes. Every county with a high obesity rate, every county with a low obesity rate, every county with a high food insecurity rate. And now how do these compare to the other attribute that I want to map against it? In this case, the obesity rates. So you can pull out these segments of the data and look at the characteristics that they have on a more detailed level. You can use it for this type of categorical data or more quantitative data. So here I've got population density and population change. So I can look at all of the high density locations in the United States and how did their population change between, I think this is the 2000 and 2010 census. So I can pull out that subset, highlight it, and then look at the second attribute of interest. So did it lose population? Did it gain population? Did it gain a lot of population? Same as using it for qualitative type data. So this is categorical, looking at crops. Where is wheat the dominant crop planted in each county, and how much of it was planted in those locations versus corn or soybeans? Or just look at where are all of the counties where we have a lot of stuff planted. Are they predominantly corn or soybeans or wheat? It allows you to look at the map as a whole to see these multiple variables coming together, or you can separate them out using the interactive legend. And then I had one more example that I wanted to bring up as a map type that I think has a lot of really good application for simplifying data and is used more than the bivariate choropleth maps, but I think still has a lot more value in explaining spatial patterns to folks. And that's looking at these tile grid maps. So I'm going to use as my base this data set of financial assistance to farms for the USDA. So we're going to look at some state level data. And we can look at this in a Tableau map where we have, let's just grab our states. Should be able to just, that's the wrong data set.
Sarah, just to let you know, we have 15 more minutes, although I could listen to you all day.
Okay, well, this is going to be a really fast example. So I'm just going to look at, I can look at, hey, it's values by state. This is a standard map that you can make in Tableau. But oftentimes you get these things where I can't really compare Alaska to, say, Rhode Island, because Alaska's gigantic. It's over here in this corner of the map, and Rhode Island is somewhere over here, and it's really tiny. But if I wanted to look at them together, I could use something like a tile grid map. So I'm going to drop the geometry on, and instead of having the states as real location and the base map underneath them, I could go ahead and just use these hexagons, or you could also use squares as well. And I can show that same data set. But now each one of these states is exactly the same size. So I could compare Rhode Island at 9.9% here to Alaska, which actually doesn't have a value reported. And if I want to put these things together, because sometimes, you actually want the geographic fidelity of a map, like a true map, but you also want to be able to see every state or every county or every location that you're working with kind of on equal visual footing. You can put them together into interactive dashboards. So I've got a table or a bar chart here that lets me look at the values for each state. And then I have a traditional map with the values for the states, and then a tile grid map with the values. And I can interact with any of these. So if I'm really interested in what states have high values, I can select them from the bar chart, where it's really easy to say, just show me the places with high values. And I can have those show up on each map so I can visually focus in on any of those locations, or just show me the states with low values, and it allows me to visually focus on those. Or if I see something interesting on the map, I can say, just show me these states. Or I really care about the south, southeast. Okay, I can highlight them. I can see the continuum of where do these states fall from Oklahoma down to North Carolina. I now have a really good visual in multiple different ways of how do the values compare in these locations. Or if I see patterns in the tile grid map that are interesting, tell me about this green cluster here. Here's how they show up on the traditional map. So they're in their true locations. Here's how they show up with respect to one another in terms of values on the bar chart. It just gives me those multiple ways of looking at the patterns. The tile grid lets you see everything on the same footing. So Rhode Island actually shows up. The traditional map gives people geographic context to know, where are these things in the real world? And then the bar chart or the other visualizations that would be relevant for displaying your type of data give people another way of looking on an attribute level at what are the patterns. And you can quickly pull out the parts that are interesting to you and have them highlighted in multiple ways so you can start doing some decision making and see all of the context between those values. So I'm going to go ahead and just sort of stop with those. I can send you any of these examples if there was something that just kind of sparked an interesting question and you want to try out any of these visualization methods. Just let me know and I can package up workbooks and send them over. Now with that, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing. Maybe I'll turn my camera back on and we can just kind of chat.
Yeah, I mean, like honestly, for me, like all the workbooks, like everything you did, I'm like, oh my God, how do I do that? Like, okay, because I already had like things I was like, I could build this and this and this, but how did she do? Like, I was really trying to like in my mind quickly recreate those. Like, how would she create that? Especially the one, like for me, it was the layering thing. And then that where you were like, if they have high obesity and then they have low, whatever, it was that interactive legend one where you could toggle the things. It was those two. I mean, in everything really, but
yeah. So the bivariate stuff, I've got a number of examples up on Tableau Public already, and I wrote a blog post for the Tableau, like the main Tableau blog on the general map type with some how-to in it. So I'll send those over as links, and you guys can share them about, because it's really a cool map type. Because oftentimes the whole point of making a map is that I want to compare more than one thing. But how do you compare more than one thing? Well, I can put two maps side by side. I can have you turn one thing on and turn the other thing off. But I want to help you actually stitch them together and say, how do they relate to one another? And I think that's where the bivariate maps really just become super useful.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it all. I'm like, what am I going to do this weekend? It's going to be beautiful outside, but I'm going to be playing.
We're going to get like 3 inches of rain this weekend, so I'd happy to send some of that over if you'd like.
yeah. Oh gosh.
I was going to ask if you had like a really good resource, and that's specific to spatial mapping, because I know there's like different people who do blogs and stuff like that, but do you have one that you really recommend?
Well, so the thing that I've put together, I wrote a maps and geocoding fact sheet that I put up on the Tableau community forums, and I can, I'll just throw that in the chat because I have it right here. I just have to, hopefully that'll copy the link. Yeah, so I just wrote this up last year and I add things to it periodically when I find interesting things across the Tableau community. A lot of it links to things that are in the Tableau community forums, but also there's so many like Zen masters that have written great blog posts or techniques that come up repeatedly. How do I do X, Y, or Z? That I just started writing them down. So it's really just this kind of like blah of here's some vague categories of things that I've thought are really interesting or that people ask about a lot. with mapping. It's like my shortcut links page.
Yes, thank you. Your cheat sheet.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And when I find more good stuff, I just kind of throw them on there without trying to make it just like this overwhelming set of links. I'm categorizing them a little bit.
Thank you for sharing that.
And if, for questions that come up, the Tableau community, the maps in geocoding, we tend to have one of the lowest unanswered question rates of any of the sections, because there are a couple people that just, kind of scour the maps in geocoding and take care of all those questions. So, if something is like really stumping you, that's a great place to reach out for the community. There are a couple Zen masters that are in there all the time looking at questions. I'm in there a couple days a week, just looking for new and interesting questions to answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. My mind is racing. I'm just, yeah.
Well, I'm glad these were interesting to you.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. And, I think personally, like we've created some regions, like some of our own, like kind of regions based on zip codes. And so I feel like I'm struggling to there are parameters, and so I can, carry them from one to the next, but I don't know. I feel like there's got to be a better way. I feel like I just kind of like patch it up each time, but I feel like and that's probably like a brain date I need to go on and like get somebody to like really.
Was it like you like these 3 zip codes? We treat them as like area 1, these 4 area 2. So
these 18, these 15.
Make an Excel file that's your crosswalk file that says, here are all of the zip codes we work with, and here's their category: area 1, area 1, area 1, area 6, and then just join that into your data sets. So all you have to do when you're working with zip codes, anytime you want to reference that, just snap that right in as a join on your data source.
Jessica, I'm curious, what are these regions? Are they just internal to United Way, or is it something?
They're how we're dividing up our investments.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and we have like it on, we have it based on Alice data, so it's a prevalence of that. And so we have it, and that's how I've done it, but I haven't done it as its own join. It's kind of baked in there with the Alice based on zip code. And so I think if I had the separate one, then I could carry it to different quicker.
But I feel like sometimes there's like regions, I don't know if that's in Alice or is it the beats or the HPD whatnot, but like the same zip code is between 2 of them. So then you like literally have to code it down to the address, like, oh, this entity exists and this one, even though like it just runs right through the zip code. And I don't know who's doing the city planning, but sometimes it just drives me crazy.
Yeah, unfortunately, like with Tableau, it's like you can't split a zip code and say you'll make half of it here and half of it here.
Yeah.
But if you had something like an external file where you could like drag and say, okay, these things are my area 1.
Right.
You could use that to join it.
They do make available, I guess you can get the GIS file sometimes to like map out these different regions. But then if you're trying to like, overlay it with other data, as you were showing, Sarah, like that becomes tricky in terms of how do you create those joins? I think that part is difficult. And maybe that's not wholly important.
We're making it a lot easier. So in 2021.3, which is the release that just came out, a month or so ago, we do what I call like join all of the things. So it's like it used to just be points and polygons for spatial intersections, and now it's polygon, line, polygon, point, polygon, polygon line, all of these different combinations. You can actually do more spatial intersections. And then in 21.4, which should be out before the end of the year, we'll be able to do layering from multiple data sources. So you won't necessarily have to join everything together in order to visualize it together. If you want the data sets to know how they relate to each other, you have to do a join.
Right.
But if you just want to see them together, you can just drop in a new data source and say, okay, now pop this on the map and pop this other thing on the map. So at least you can do the visual analysis without having to do, kind of figure out the structure of all of these crazy spatial joins. And that's a good place to start. And then you can figure out which of these data sets do I actually have to figure out how to join them together, see them first, and then figure out the joins. So look forward to 21.4. It's actually going to be pretty cool. And we've got a lot of new things coming for next year as well. The maps team is just cranking out features.
We're going to try and keep up, but no promises there.
So I'll package up, I'll send over a handful of links, with some workbooks and stuff. I've got a bunch of things already up on Tableau Public, and then I'll just send workbooks for the other stuff, or I'll finally get around to just putting them on Tableau Public because I forget. My Tableau Public, I'll just tell you, I do not make pretty maps. I make maps that just do stuff. And so I rely on other people to actually do things that look good. I just want to show people how to do them. Yeah, I'm a cartographer that does not do design.
So are you in the Boston area, or do you just know the data really well?
I just really liked that data set because it had problems in it. I'm in Seattle.
Oh, gotcha.
And so,
okay.
So I harvest open data portals from cities that seem interesting. I've used San Diego also has some really good data. So sometimes I use that. Mainly because my mom lives in San Diego, and there are a lot of complaints about scooters, like those scooter share things. And my mom hates the scooters, hates them. So I made her a workbook in Tableau to show where all of the scooter complaints were. And I've heard that my mom is a very she's a power user of their San Diego 311. And so I just assume that this cluster of complaints around where she lives is her. And so it was like my trolling my mom workbook. I put in little scooter logos. And so it's I just kind of pick cities that have kind of big open data sets.
Yeah. Do you know how the Texas cities are in that sense? I'm curious. I
haven't done a ton of searching. I mean, I'm assuming that Houston probably has a pretty good data portal, and I would guess Austin probably. You're no, they've got nothing.
Well, we have problems. I don't know if we have data to analyze them.
I feel like most major cities have created some kind of open data portal. How much stuff they put in it and how much detail they provide is really varied. Like the 311 data, a lot of cities have an equivalent of it, but not all of them give you things like latitude and longitude. So it's here's 400 service requests, and you can get the date and the request. Cool. That does me no good.
Right. Now, is there any, I guess, if you do have latitude and longitude, then I guess the burden is on us to protect that data. You guys, I get the privacy of that data, particularly if, we're putting that out there. Because
I mean, a lot of cities, with their portals and stuff, they'll anonymize to some level. So if you go, the city of Seattle, you can get crime locations from the police department, and they're all snapped to intersections. So you can't see the actual location of anything. You just know, it's at this particular intersection. So all of the data kind of often lines up in these little grids because they're not going to tell you exactly where. Yeah.
That makes sense.
And every once in a while you find weird problems where it's there's a break-in in the middle of Lake Union. I think it's kind of how all of the data points got dropped on City Hall in Boston. It's this, somebody fat fingered something, or somebody just said, here's a default, and it's boom, there you go.
Yeah.
Lake
there
Union,
are lots of
crime.
Lots of regular people keying in data, so making regular people mistakes.
Yeah, I was looking for a data set in the Houston open data because we're participating in a data-thon, and I was trying to find something. And it was everything I found, it was last updated 2017. Last updated 2017. I was thank you, Houston.
Yeah, it was nice of you to try. This is actually
really good until 2017. I need to figure out what happened, who got fired.
Well, I mean, this is a big problem I found with portals. So I do some work with the FGDC, the Federal Geographic Data Committee, and they have this geo portal. You can go in and get a bunch of data. And there's this thing where, okay, everybody, you're required to put data in. And so everybody's like, okay, fine, we put data in, but where's the requirement to update? And it's like, there are all of these mandates where, you know, someone in the city says, okay, every agency, you know, it's all FOIA-able data, you know, everybody can request it. So we've got to make it public so we don't just have to deal with each of the individual FOIA requests. Great, do it. And everybody gets really excited about it. And they throw all the data into the portal. And then until the next time someone gets like really passionate about, oh crap, we haven't done this, because no one has the resource. You know, it's not like they're saying, we're going to staff you to keep this up to date. It's like, you have to do it. You're like, okay, I've checked the box, it's done. Now we've got to do all of the other 9,000 things we also don't have time to do.
Right. Yeah.
So it's the way. Well, it's 1:30, so it is that time. Thank you, Sarah. It has been fabulous. I could watch you do maps all day.
Well, maybe next year we'll have like an in-person TC and we can all like hang out and like do some maps or something. Like, this is my dream, like being able to like do this in person again.
Yes. That would be fabulous.
Cool. And I'll send you some links, and if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
Put it on Tableau Public.
Yeah, I'll put them on Tableau Public, and then I'll send you links to all of those.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. And our next Tableau group is, Jessica put it in the chat, February 11th, same time, 12 to 1:30. So we'll see you guys next year.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.